Hello everyone, welcome to the most ridiculous part of the clown decade, election time, where we can see how everything is going to get worse before we don't really know how it's going to get better. And today we are going through this tweet and making corrections where it needs to be. I'm going to say right at the start, I'm not bothering with any of the Lib Dems stuff. I only have limited time to make these videos, and I really don't care about the Lib Dems. And the only reason I'm including the Green Party is to show you how ridiculous things could actually be. I'd also like to point out at this point that I won't be going into any particular detail into these manifesto pledges. Over on the Worcester Club channel last night we did a stream mainly focusing on Labour's manifesto, going through it in a bit of detail and quickly skimming over Tory's manifesto because honestly, one, Tory's manifesto isn't particularly interesting, and two, they're probably going to get absolutely rinsed anyway. And tonight we are going to be going through Reform's manifesto, so if you want to catch that, please do subscribe to the Worcester Club, and also please see the links that I send out through the community page, through Twitter, through the Discord as well. Specifically for this video, I am literally just taking the numbers at face value and specifically fact-checking this graph and obviously making my own to be a hell of a lot more accurate. Anyway, this tweet is by Ed Conway, the economics editor for Sky News. And as you can see, literally all it is showing you the spending pledges from each party, which includes rises on spending and obviously losses in tax due to tax cuts. And the reason I wanted to go through it is because it seems absolute nonsense that Conservative and Labour's spending pledges could be so low, while Reform's could be so big. Now, this is one of those lies, damn lies, and statistics scenarios where if you take this seriously and don't even criticise it whatsoever, you may be one of the millions of reasons that I'm starting to think that many people in the country simply shouldn't have a vote. Anyway, as mentioned, the graph is simply only showing spending pledges and tax cuts added together. An eagle-eyed economist noticed that for Labour, it was just extra current spending excluding capital expenditure. Is this applied consistently across other parties, particularly the Greens, where it looks to include capital expenditure? To which Ed Conway replies, yes, it's current spending plans, though for the Tories it's tax cuts plus spending plans. So I assume that's true for Reform as well. It doesn't include capital expenditure for the Greens. They want an extra 90 billion on top, taking it to £250 billion or so. And of course, completely taking out increase in tax burdens is not exactly a great way to actually show you anything useful. And not only that, but completely ignoring savings they will make in the public sector as well. This graph is effectively completely pointless. As I say, this is lies, damn lies, and statistics. The whole point of this graph is to try and say, oh look, Reform are making pie-in-the-sky promises. They're promising an extra £141 billion into expenditure. They're going to make an £141 deficit. And plenty of reactions on Twitter are taking that to heart and saying, oh, Reform aren't the capitalist party, they're going to expand the public sector. Which is, of course, obvious nonsense, and that is why I have spent the good part of this morning going through the manifesto to, one, work out how accurate Ed Conway actually is, and two, to work out how much total expenditure or savings each party is actually committing to, specifically for 2029, though I'll go into why in a second. So let's start off with the main parties. Firstly, Labour. So luckily each manifesto has an entire table letting us know exactly their estimates for revenue and funding. And as we can see, Labour do break it down via each spending pledge and each revenue saving pledge or tax rise. And it's important to point out at the top here that the revenue and policies funded for particularly the public services section is specifically for year ending 2029, and that is why I'm specifically looking at spending pledges just for 2029. And if there are pledges that are just for the entire time period, I divide the figure by 5 to give a fair comparison between each spending and tax cut pledge, well, along with tax revenue pledge as well. Anyway, it's important to point out at this part as well that, yes, this is estimates just for 2029, and it's important we say it's just estimates because, as you can see, The Labour Party plan to close the non-dom tax loophole, which I just want to touch upon. It's a relatively sensible tax loophole, if you want to call it that. All it does is means that if you are domicile in another country, you can't be taxed twice on your income. Now, the reason it's a loophole is because people who obviously domicile in Britain, let's say Rishi Sunak's wife, can use this to their advantage by staying as a citizen of, say, India and not one of Great Britain, so that they can claim that they live in India when really they live in Britain. And the problem with that is that you are probably going to see people moving out of Britain to try and avoid this type of tax, and in the end, the estimate's going to be a lot lower than you are first estimated, but these are things that only time will tell. And so I'm really making this point more than anything to say, bear in mind, every number I'm going to go through is simply an estimate. These are estimates also for Reform, who I am generally backing in this election as well. So when I give the numbers at the end, bear in mind hugely that they are just estimates. Anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So as you can see from the first set of figures, again, this is just for year ending 2029, the total for tax revenue is estimated to be about 7.35 billion. Total expenditure expected for that time period as well is 4.835 billion pounds. This so far is a total expenditure figure of, well, it's actually a saving of 2.515 billion pounds. And it's worth noting at this point that this spending figure, this 4.835 figure, that is literally all Ed Conway used for his graph. He literally just went, right, what's our total spending, right? Ignore CapEx, which we're about to get into, and then I'll just use that number, it'll be fine. Literally all he did was look at total expenditure that wasn't part of capital expenditure and use that figure. That's all he did. This is the height of economic commentary on Sky News. Literally just, what have they said? Right, I'm going to put that figure in a graph and compare it to the rest and that'll be fine. Ignoring savings made in the public sector and gains made on taxes is not a good way to do this type of thing, which is why I've put total spending at the top here, so that you can follow along with my mathematics and see truly actually how much each party is spending. Anyway, next up is the Green Prosperity Plan. Again, I'm not particularly going into details on this, but I do want you to bear in mind that on the Worcester Club we went through the policies yesterday, and practically all of these green prosperity plans, while the plan is to spend this money to then make it back and more for a national wealth fund, the things they're investing in don't generally make that much money. There's way too much speculation on it at the moment. It's including things like electric vehicles, it's including things like carbon capture storage, which isn't even a profit-seeking venture. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, but it's definitely something that we are paying for to save the planet, as the climate cultists would say. And if climate change and things like that get bad enough due to CO2, I think it's a fairly good plan to go into carbon capture storage, but it's not there to make money like Labour are implying. Anyway, as you can see from the figures, these are average annual expenditure figures, and it averages to about £4.7 billion a year. And at least they're open on the left-hand side that they are going to have to borrow at least £3.5 billion to fund this. So just to make that clear, that adds £4.7 billion to this total spending figure. This brings Labour out of a budget surplus to £2.185 billion in expenditure per year, or at least just for 2029. So finally, Labour are going to try and cut waste with changes in departmental spending. This comes to a total reallocation, or saving, so to speak, of about £1.46 billion a year. This brings Labour's deficit down to about £0.725 billion a year. So from their estimates alone, it is lower than Ed Conway predicted, at less than £1 billion expenditure a year. However, once again, I need to emphasise that these are estimates. You have to bear in mind that part of Labour's plan, especially with the Green Prosperity Plan, is that they put in initial funding for that sort of thing, and the private sector make up another 3/4 of the total investment. In other words, per pound spent of the public sector money, there should be £3 of private investment going in to these ventures. Again, I've gone through this in another video, but these are all dedicated to sectors that aren't very good at making money, and sectors that the private companies are going out of. Partially because prices are too low and profitability simply isn't there, while they're planning on increasing windfall tax, and from what I can tell, they're not doing anything about the price cap. So exactly what they're doing to incentivise businesses to invest in this sort of thing, I have no idea. Basically what they've done is do what the Tories do, but harder. So again, take this estimate with a pinch of salt, but for the purposes of this video, we're taking this and running with it. So next up, it's the Tories' spending plans, and this is the point where I have to say I have no idea where Ed Conway got his numbers from. Anyway, on screen now are the tax cuts. Once again, I want you to bear in mind we are looking at 2029 figures only. And the tax cuts from the Tories come in at about £15.601 billion. Now, it's pretty clear from here that Ed Conway did not use the comparable 2029 figures when creating his graph, because somehow he got £13 billion of tax cuts and spending pledges from the Tories. There's no £13 billion here, so you might think that that comes from spending pledges. Well, don't worry, we're going to get into that. However, firstly, we're carrying on with my calculations. And here we are looking at savings from welfare reform and tackling the tax gap. So these figures are actually government savings rather than tax revenues, and include savings from reforming welfare and cracking down on tax avoidance. So basically every time the government says we're going to crack down on tax avoidance, this is how much we're going to save, they probably end up spending more than they actually save on it. Again, that applies to every party. But once again, just to emphasise, I am taking these numbers and running with them because I want to show you how stupid Sky News are. Anyway, the 2029 figure for this is £16,000. This brings the Tories to a total savings so far of £0.399 billion. But we have more numbers to go through. Spending pledges. Now, this is all quite small to read on the screen because there's so much, but I do want to include everything. But just to ease your eyes, I will let you know that for 2029, the Tories are actually expected to make a saving of £385 million. And I want to point out at this part that I think the way that Ed Conway has actually worked out the expenditure of 13 billion is by averaging out the spending over each year. Now, I want to make the point very clear that you can't do like for like in that way. But what he has done here is taken Labour's plan for 2029, taken that and then tried to compare it to the Tories' average spending over 5 years. That is the definition of garbage in, garbage out statistics. He's not done a like-for-like comparison. He has averaged the total tax cuts and spending for Tories, while with Labour just cherry-picked 1 year because it's the only year that they gave statistics for. Which is why I have been very clear at the beginning, my method for this is we are only comparing 2029 or average annual data. And this, by the way, is going to show you why what they have done with reform is total nonsense. Anyway, back to my calculations. For 2029, this is going to give the Tories a £0.784 billion surplus for 2029. Again, we are doing like for like here. We are looking at 2029 figures only. Obviously, if we average this out, we would probably see actually less of a surplus, but I'm just going off what Labour have given me, I'm afraid. So for the year 2029, Tories are making a saving of about 700 million, whereas Labour have an expenditure of about 700 million. Now, I'm not going to lie, in terms of public expenditure, this is a difference of about 0.001% or something infinitesimally small like that. If you're getting deficits or surpluses of millions, it may as well be zero. And generally, as we especially go through in the streams over on the Worcester Club, the manifestos are fairly similar. They're both aiming at welfare reform, they are both aiming at cracking down on tax avoidance, both looking at the non-dom status, both still going after net zero, but Labour are going a bit more mad on it. Generally, yes, it is true. Effectively, what is happening in this election again is that the Tories are just going Labour's way, but at the speed limit. And as mentioned already, the Sky News graph, which is up on screen again, is complete nonsense already. Comparing Labour's 2029 expenditure claims with the Tories' average 5-yearly expenditure claim is not good statistical analysis. This is a useless graph, but now we're going to go into the Green Party, which, you know, from the tweet earlier you would assume, oh, he's been quite lenient on the Greens. Now actually he's been particularly harsh on the Greens, as he's been particularly harsh on reform. Right, the Greens' turn. revenue spending in billions of pounds for 2029 will total £145.1 billion. Obviously, so far bringing total expenditure for the Greens to £145.1 billion. Bear in mind, all Ed Conway did was take that figure on the right and run with it. The £161.6 billion. Again, not a comparison with 2029. Completely garbage statistics. For some reason, he's taking the smaller parties' worst possible interpretations and running with them. Again, why would he take the Tories and average theirs out over the years, but when it came to the Greens, he took the worst possible one? This is what we call a certified uniparty moment. I don't even like the Greens. I don't think the Greens should even necessarily be a political party with the ideas that they have. But my God, if we're going to live in this constitutional monarchy where we're at least trying to put up the facade of being fair, at least do a good job of it. Taking just the 2030 figures from here while you take the 2029 figures from another and take an average of all 5 years for another is very, very bad statistics. Again, this is why I'm trying to say I'm going into detail on this and letting you know my exact methodology so you can see where some of the problems are. Yes, I am putting some averages up against individual years' expenditure. I have to, you will see, because Reform only give the 5 years expenditure. Anyway, next up it's capital spending, which were removed from Ed Conway's graph. The 2029 figure is £69 billion, bringing so far the total costings up to £214.1 billion. Well, you better hope that taxation makes up for an awful lot of that. Well, they're expected taxation pledges, which is basically mostly a carbon tax plus taxing the wealth. So again, take these estimates with a bit more than a pinch of salt, and we end up with £151.2 billion in tax revenue, bringing total expenditure in 2029 for the Greens to £62.9 billion, which is a bit of an absurd idea to borrow all that money, but the Greens are pretty open that that's exactly what they're going to do. As most people replying to the graph were saying, oh, it's great when you have no plans to actually get many seats in Parliament because you have absolutely no compulsion to actually deliver any of this. A lot of people are saying that for Reform too, but Reform actually go not even the other way. Reform are basically a slightly better Tories with their spending plan. In fact, no, not slightly better, much better. We'll go quickly into why. So Reform are very, very simple when it comes to their tables, which is good because I don't want this video to go on for too long. So firstly, saving pledges. This includes savings made via reforms in the public sector and extra tax on top of that. Bear in mind, I want to point out extra taxes, and by the way, this is actually an annual average figure, so these are directly comparable. So the annual savings, as you can see at the bottom, is £150 billion per annum. Naturally, this brings the spending figure to minus £150 billion. Music to my ears. I also like how they add that's about £3,000 saved per adult. However, there will also be some spending pledges, because obviously there will be. So these, once again, are annualised costs. So every year, as you can see at the bottom, it will be a cost of about £141 billion. As you can see, that brings total spending to minus £9 billion. That is a £9 billion saving. Now, once again, I'm happy to say, once again, that indeed these are simply just estimates, but I have to tell you, given how much manifestos lie from every other party, I am happy to take a risk on a £9 billion public revenue savings than I am for any of the other estimates, especially with a completely new party that has every incentive to actually deliver what they promise. The reason Tories and Labour don't have any incentive to do so is because of the literally millions of mindless loyalist voters. So yes, this is another reason I am more than happy to vote Reform this election. Anyway, because I am a massive nerd, I have decided to put this all into an Excel spreadsheet and create a little graph for you. So here is the graph in all of its glory. Obviously, Greens absolutely massively going to be getting into more borrowing in 2029 than absolutely anyone else. Reform, again, with all of this, assuming all the estimates are accurate, bear in mind, they're probably all, including Reform, overestimating how much they're saving and underestimating how much things will cost. But as I say, taking these numbers and running with it, Reform is definitely the party you'd want to vote for if one of your priorities is reducing the size of the state. That is a budget surplus of £9 billion, whereas the Greens is what you vote for if you're a communist that wants to smoke weed. But with that, I think I've made my point very well. Never trust statistics that you see from news sources. Apparently they don't even bother putting the minimal effort in to even try and share the statistics out fairly. As I say, they were making completely different comparisons, picking completely different years where they could, to try and give the worst possible outcome for the smaller parties like the Green and Reform, and giving you the best case scenarios with Tories and Labour. Certified uniparty moment, what else can I say? And when it came to the Lib Dems that I missed out on, well, frankly, who cares? Anyway, once again, that is everything I had for you today. Please catch the Worcester Club's stream tonight, where we'll be going through the Reform Party's contract. I shall be doing a Laughing at the Guardian this weekend. I really need to sort out guests for that, and obviously there will be more videos coming out in the near future. But for now, I hope you very much enjoyed this deep dive into the statistics of the party manifestos. And with that, that's everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.